The sun mercilessly scorched the rocky valley. A crowd of people froze in anticipation. Above their heads towered agitated war beasts. All of them silently watched the duel. The sword rushed forward in a flash. Its wielder mercilessly drove the blade into his enemy's throat. The man rasped, feeling death closing in. The sword's owner remained completely calm. Sprays of blood splattered across the area. The man yanked his sword free, and the defeated enemy collapsed dead to the ground. Heavy breaths burst from the victor's mouth, and a wave of exhaustion washed over him. Everyone watching the duel was furious, calling down curses on the man's head. But he, not reacting to their insults at all, tried to straighten up, barely able to stand. Seeing the man was clearly exhausted, the people around him rushed in to attack all at once. The swordsman felt blood flooding his eyes and his heart tearing apart. Each breath came with difficulty, like a blade scraping his throat. He no longer cared whether it was sweat or blood running down his face. And as he watched the armed crowd sprinting toward him to kill him, he could no longer tell whether this was really a game or already reality. All he knew was that he had to grip his sword tighter. A system message appeared before his eyes, saying his hidden trait, Heart of the Iron Monarch, had activated, along with a number of other abilities. Feeling a surge of strength, the man braced himself for the next battle. For him, this was undeniably reality. Trash scattered everywhere, empty food and drink wrappers on the table. In the dark room, a disheveled-looking man sat in front of a glowing computer screen. On the monitor in front of him, a message shone, announcing the end of the game. The man let out an angry breath, leaning back, dissatisfied with the result. His parents had named him Park Hyun-myung, hoping he would live his life wisely. But looking at the situation he was in, it didn't seem like that at all. Park Hyun-myung had been unemployed for a couple of months already. And now, night after night, all the man did was play a game. But to be honest, even before getting fired, his life wasn't much different from what it was now. He had been playing this game for 5 years. The game was called Pangea, and 5 years ago, it briefly topped the popularity charts. The developers promised to grant the wish of whoever could clear it, stirring players into a frenzy. But in all that time, no one had managed it because the game was insanely difficult, and little by little, people drifted away. Now Park Hyun-myung was the only person who still kept playing. The bosses were the kind that made you think, is it even possible to kill them at all? NPCs you thought were allies could easily kill you. And if a bounty was placed on your character's head, absolutely everyone hunted you down. But most of all, what was infuriating was that after death, your progress was completely erased, and you had to start over from the beginning. Maybe because of that difficulty, not only players, but even haters lost interest. Park Hyun-myung even got the feeling it had been made on purpose to keep players from clearing it. In this game, 15 unique items were known, 8 of which the man had obtained for his character, yet he still died. Suddenly, Park Hyun-myung's attention was caught by a message that appeared on the screen. It said the character would be deleted, but in exchange, the player would receive 1,600,000 soul points. The man was stunned because before this, not one of his deleted characters had ever earned more than 80,000. In Pangea, there is a soul point system. In other words, the value of a character's achievements after death is converted into points. When creating a new hero, you can invest these points into any talent, and the more you invest, the faster you level up. In one of his past characters, Hyun-myung invested 10,000 soul points into sword mastery, and that character died as a sword master. At most, you could spend 10,000 points on a single talent, but now the man didn't have to limit himself in the number of abilities. At first, Hyun-myung wanted to level up safe magic like lightning the way he usually did, but this time he changed his mind. Unlike the previous times, he wanted to use random. He decided this would be the last time he created a character in this game, and so he left everything to chance. Hesitating a little, he clicked the mouse button. A few weeks ago, he had a girlfriend, but despite how long they had been dating, she decided to break up with him. The girl explained that she thought he was a good guy, but she couldn't date someone with no prospects. She believed it was time for her to start thinking about marriage. Her words made Hyun-myung freeze, because he himself had wanted to propose to her, but the words never left his lips. The girl went on, saying all her friends were dating successful guys from big companies, and some were already married. But Park Hyun-myung was not that kind of person. He knew himself he wouldn't achieve much at his job. Seeing that the guy had nothing to say in response, the girl said goodbye and left. And Hyun-myung still couldn't say anything to her as she went. All he could do was watch the one who ended everything herself and walked away. 3 months ago, he went through a breakup with the girl he had been with for more than 5 years. Back then, in anger, he quit his dead-end job and shut himself in his room, turning into a complete gaming addict. But even that had to end, and the man took one last risk and put everything on luck. If he was unlucky in love, then maybe, in the end, he'd be lucky in the game. So, full of resolve, he chose random and decided to play with no regrets. The system immediately bombarded him with messages saying a huge number of soul points had been used to acquire talents. And among them, one caught Hyunyoung's attention, and it shocked him. For the first time in his life, a hidden element had been activated. And right after that came a message that certain conditions had been met, and the player had been invited into Pangea. The next moment, the entire space lit up. A chill ran through his whole body, and a ringing filled his head. Through the noise cut someone's scream, like the screech of metal, cursing the creator and threatening to destroy his world. And together with that, true hell unfolded before his eyes. The scream was so loud, it was unbearable. Park Hyun-young couldn't understand what was happening to him. He kept hearing the voice in his head again and again, until he lost consciousness. Falling to the floor, Hyun-young no longer saw what was happening around him. His computer screen lit up with a bright red glow. A message appeared on it, literally protruding from the screen, saying that the one who stands in the vortex of creation and destruction, brighter than light and darkness, must attain happiness in Pangea. Park Hyun-young came to from pain when some man struck him with a whip, shouting that he was a useless slave and had to get up, and that he had fallen. The guy couldn't understand what had happened to him, and the man's next words, that if he fell again he'd become food for the High Dragon, didn't make the situation any clearer. Then it finally clicked for Hyun-young what the man was talking about. Somewhere ahead came the heavy footsteps of a large beast. All around, countless people were marching. Hundreds of men had their hands tightly bound like his, driven forward through the gorge, and from time to time others lashed them with whips. Putting together who had hit him and what was happening around him, Park Hyun-young began to guess what had happened to him, no matter how unbelievable it sounded. But even more unbelievable was the fact that at the head of the column walked a gigantic, multi-headed monster the guy had never seen in real life, yet recognized instantly. The High Dragon was the first trial every player in Pangea was guaranteed to face. Agonizing pain made his hair stand on end as the whip came down on his back again, but Hyun-young forced himself to swallow a groan. Unable to keep his balance, he rolled along the ground, and the driver shouted that if he wanted to live, he had to get up. The situation was terrifyingly confusing, but the guy turned out to be more composed than expected. Getting up from the ground, Park Hyun-young marched forward with the others. To his own surprise, he oriented himself quickly and adapted instantly. It seemed like a game, but at the same time, not a game, because every sensation, including touch, was no different from reality. Even the landscapes were familiar from the game. Deciding to test something, the guy said the words "status window." The next moment, a blue transparent screen appeared before his eyes. A powerful shock flooded his mind, and a curse almost burst out that very instant. The realization that he had truly entered the game finally came together like pieces of a puzzle. Then his attention shifted to the stats window, and that surprised him too. His stats were strange, because normally attributes were set in the range from 1 to 10 depending on talents, but all of his started at 12. On top of that, he had 13 hidden traits, something that had never happened to him before. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Park Hyun-young unconsciously asked what was happening, but no one around answered because all attention was focused on the road ahead. All of a sudden, one of the guards noticed something and his face changed. With a savage roar, a gigantic mass of people was charging toward them from the distance. At the head of the approaching force, the silhouette of a woman atop the High Dragon's head was visible, and someone shouted that it was the Desert Queen's army, daring to break the non-aggression pact. The army was led into the attack by none other than the Snake Princess, and it looked like her goal was to wipe everyone out here. Instinct screamed at the top of its lungs that if Hyun-young stood still, he would die. But it was so astonishing to see a living character he had only ever seen on a computer screen. At the same time, a system message appeared before his eyes about a generated quest. Reading it, Hyun-young was shocked again because it consisted of a single word: survive. And if he failed, death of the body both in the game and in reality. The next moment, a hail of arrows flew at them. Crashing down on people, they struck everyone without discrimination. The Snake Princess army killed without hesitation, both soldiers and slaves, ignoring pleas for mercy. As someone from a relatively peaceful Earth, Park Hyun-young was stunned in the first moments, not knowing what to do next. Then he felt a tremor run through his whole body, and the guy realized one of his hidden traits had forcibly activated. Heart of the Iron Monarch. It granted the ability to make cold-blooded decisions in extreme situations, increasing the body's endurance. The moment the enemies broke into their ranks, the battlefield turned into true hell. Glancing around, Hyunyoung saw the body of the traitor who had beaten him earlier, and a ring of keys lying nearby on the ground. Snatching it from the dead traitor, the guy started removing his shackles when one of the enemy warriors rushed at him. The soldier was already close, but Hyunyoung didn't panic and instead coldly surveyed everything around him. He grabbed the hilt of a sword lying on the ground and prepared to strike. Using a weapon directly with his body was different from triggering actions with a mouse click, but the guy managed it. Hyunyoung figured out how to use the blade and the swords collided. The guy clearly saw the sword's movement path and the place where he needed to land the blow. And before he could even process it, his body reacted and the enemy received a fatal wound. The hidden trait Weapon Master also forcibly activated the moment he entered combat. There wasn't the slightest hesitation or fear, because the path of the sword, like any path of battle, was already projected before his eyes. More and more people were closing in on him faster and faster. Park Hyunyoung turned toward the noise to assess the situation. At that moment, a spearman was the first to reach him and lunged in attack. The guy let him come right up close and struck with his sword, cleaving him and the spear in half. The spearman fell, and the spear's tip flew up into the air with a broken piece of the shaft. Before the tip touched the ground, Park Hyunyoung grabbed the snapped shaft. Throwing it, the guy drove the spearhead through the neck of another soldier. At that moment, a man with an axe, drunk on the thirst for victory, swung at him with lightning speed. Park Hyunyoung barely managed to dodge the blade aimed at his chest. The hidden trait Weapon Mastery let him handle any weapon like a veteran without needing special training. And it also let him see the trajectory of an opponent's weapon. His body automatically delivered a counterstrike, parrying and deflecting with precision. That was why Hyunyoung easily knocked aside the axe blade rushing at him with his sword. Moreover, he could see the spot where he needed to strike the enemy's body. In his eyes, the path of the sword strike appeared as a transparent light, visible only to him. Following that path, Hyunyoung delivered the blow. The next moment, his sword blade plunged into the enemy's chest. Letting go of the blade, the guy seized the handle of the axe the enemy attacking him was holding. Yanking it from his hands, Hyunyoung swung to deliver the final blow to his opponent. A fountain of blood shot into the air as he cut off the warrior's head. Seeing this, the others froze in place. Park Hyunyoung, taking advantage of the unexpected respite, tried to catch his breath. A murmur of horror and approval rippled through the hostile soldiers, whispering that the guy was a real monster. At that moment, a system message arrived saying that sword and spear mastery had been raised to level 6. Hyunyoung knew that in the game, the maximum skill level was 10, and that meant he was now as strong as an experienced knight. If not for his hidden talents at level 1, he would hardly have lasted this long. But there were more than 500 people in front of him, and Hyunyoung wasn't sure he could keep resisting like this, which meant he had to come up with something fast. Earlier, in a dark, gloomy hall before the throne, the Snake Princess stood on one knee. She brought news to the Desert Queen that the expedition into the demon world had failed. That was not very good news for the Queen. The girl confirmed that everything she had said was true. The Queen, lost in thought, noted that if it became known Faisalmir had not joined the campaign, the people of the Central Continent would blame them for the failure, and they could not allow that. For that reason, the woman ordered the Snake Princess to kill everyone who survived there, everyone who knew and could tell others that Faisalmir had not sent troops. She demanded that all evidence linking them to the failure be destroyed. In return, if the girl succeeded, the Queen promised to lift her curse. The words she heard made the Snake Princess tense up. More than anything in the world, she longed to be free. And so she had no choice but to obey the order. And she had no right to make a mistake in this matter. That was why now the Snake Princess was staring at the center of the battlefield with a strange look. A man kneeling before her was reporting on the situation. He said that one slave was still alive. That news stunned the girl. Just as surprising was the fact that this guy had killed many of her people, and crippled even more. Alone, he had stirred up chaos on the battlefield, towering over everyone. Park Hyunyoung breathed heavily, feeling the limits of his strength. Suddenly, a system notification came that he had reached level 2. Because of that, the guy immediately recovered both his health and mana, and the negative fatigue effect was removed. The warriors surrounding him gathered to attack again. But at that moment, the Snake Princess voice swept across the battlefield, ordering them to stop. Hyunyoung froze, along with everyone else, finally able to get a good look at the girl. Her name was Isabella von Derzian. Hyunyoung learned that from her character status, and also that she was level 8. Seeing the gap in their statuses, the guy thought that even if he had several lives, he still probably couldn't defeat her right now. Pangea was a game where the maximum level was 10, and at level 7, your power jumped so sharply that the gap was hard to overcome. Level 8 was already the level of the elite. top fighters, or simply put, only leaders of major factions had that kind of strength. Looking at the girl, Hyunyoung clearly realized that in a direct clash, he wouldn't survive. Suddenly, his attention was caught by her status, which said she couldn't leave the region because of the Desert Queen's curse. Jumping down from the High Dragon, Isabella headed toward him. Looking at the guy, she praised his talent, admitting she was impressed, but she had no intention of letting him keep living any longer. Hyunmyoung understood she was going to kill him, but thanks to the Heart of the Iron Blood Monarch, he didn't even flinch under her aura. As an avid Pangea player, famous for its brutal difficulty, he knew that no matter how hard the situation was, he could always find a way to clear it. As the craziest of all players, he always took pleasure in victory, winning on instinct. And now, watching Isabella stride toward him, he had one suspicion. The girl pointed the blade of her sword at him, but the next moment, Hyunmyoung asked whether she didn't want to lift the queen's curse. For a moment, it seemed to him he had guessed wrong, but the blade in the girl's hand stopped just a few inches from his neck. Isabella froze with a strange expression on her face. Leaning in as close as possible, she hissed through clenched teeth. Staring into his eyes, Isabella quietly asked who he was. In response, she heard that he was the one who reads the stars and shows the way, a star reader. Park Hyunmyoung, looking at her confidently, declared that he could lift the queen's curse and help her leave the desert. Those words struck the girl deeply. From her reaction, Hyunyoung realized it had worked. Star readers were only NPCs who helped the player surpass level 10, and of course the guy couldn't be one in reality. But to remove the Queen's Curse status, you needed the Blessing of the Stars, which a star reader grants. Isabella longed to be rid of that curse, so she simply couldn't resist Hyunmyoung's offer, and the guy knew that perfectly well. All because Isabella von Dershian was a character created by Park Hyunmyoung, his failed build, when he picked the wrong starting option and therefore abandoned the game as Isabella. In the game's story, the Queen's Curse is a mechanic that prevents players from leaving the starting zone too early. All player characters want to reach the game's finale, and to do that, they must travel the world. But since the guy abandoned Isabella at the start, the Queen's Curse trapped her in the desert. Calming down a little, the girl asked what his name was. Until then, Hyunyoung hadn't even thought about it, but immediately gave the name Randolph. Right after that, he received a notification that the character name had been set. For a while, Isabella silently stared at him. Then, turning away, she said she would postpone his execution for now. Watching her back, Hyunmyoung immediately understood what she meant, because if she realized he had lied to her, she would tear him to pieces on the spot. Then she moved through the ranks of her army, ordering them to treat the guy like a noble guest with the utmost respect. Immediately after that, a system message appeared, saying his quest, Survive, had been completed. And the next moment, along with a stream of reward messages, strength left his body. Messages appeared saying he had obtained a fragment of the Shattered Golden Rule, the High Dragon's Soul, and the Sword of Makela. But such relief washed over him at the thought that he had managed to survive that his consciousness shut down for a short while. Arriving in the city of Faisalmere, Park Hyunmyoung was settled in a large palace. Sitting in the bathtub, the guy checked the contents of the system messages he had received earlier, barely holding back his astonishment. For example, in the 5 years he had spent in the game, the High Dragon's Soul had dropped for the first time, let alone the Sword of Mikela. On top of that, there was also an unknown fragment of the Shattered Rule, which he didn't know synchronized reality and Pangea. Suddenly, the door flew open, and 3 girls entered the room, wearing nothing but thin silk garments. One of them told Hyunmyoung that they were here to help wash him. The guy guessed the maids had been sent to test him, so he asked them to wash only his feet, since that was an important ritual for accepting outsiders in Faisalmere. Star readers were devoid of sexual desire, and if he reacted in any way, they would immediately suspect him of lying. Even with the Heart of the Iron Blood Monarch, it was hard for him, being a healthy man, trying to keep himself under control. The guy closed his eyes and tried to relax, thinking about something else. But the moment he looked around again, his gaze ran straight into the charms of one of the girls. Park Hyunmyoung immediately opened his stats window, just to be safe. Focusing on it, the guy saw that the growth of his indicator was quite abnormal, which made him frown. But more important was that a new line had appeared, reporting the collapse of Pangea, and its description said that upon reaching 10%, the boundary between reality and Pangea would begin to disappear. Then, opening the game's Hall of Fame panel, the guy was surprised to see that his character was in first place. But there were other names there as well. The girl washing his feet called out to Park Hyunmyoung, noticing his strange reaction. But the guy didn't react to her at all, because he saw on the list a couple of names of people who had played with him before. He thought those two had quit the game because they vanished without a word, but it looked like they had been summoned into Pangea as well. His attention was also caught by a message saying that those who entered the ranking had unlocked the function to exit the game, because that meant he could return to reality. The next moment, he demanded that the girls leave him alone, because it was time for him to commune with the stars. When they objected, saying they had been ordered to take care of him, the guy said with a serious face that if a star reader didn't perform the rite on time, he would lose his power. He also asked whether the Snake Princess really wanted that, and the girls stopped arguing. As they were leaving the room, Hyunmyoung told them he would visit the princess himself after performing the rite. Wishing him a successful ritual, the girls closed the door behind them. Left alone, Park Hyunmyoung was glad that such a stupid excuse had worked. Climbing out of the bath, the guy muttered that the mere thought of being stuck here forever made him want to die for real. He had to pull himself together to do everything correctly. Mentally wishing to never come back here again, the guy pressed the button. Then several system messages appeared saying he needed to place his character in a safe place because if the character died, the body in the real world would die as well. The next moment, his vision blurred, and then, when it returned, Park Hyunmyoung saw his computer screen turned on. But something was clearly wrong because there were strange sounds outside the window. The guy looked out the window, but what he saw was beyond comprehension. The entire city was blazing with fire. People were running in panic from some enormous monsters. Those monsters looked like giant mantises. Suddenly, his cell phone lit up with a message saying that residents of his city, along with a number of other places that had come under attack, were to take shelter. One of the monsters spotted Park Hyunmyoung peering out the window. The monster immediately opened its maw wide, wanting to swallow him while letting out a piercing scream. Frightened, the guy recoiled from the window and fell to the floor. Unable to believe what was happening, he stared in shock and wondered why the Pangea monsters had appeared in reality. At that moment, a strange item fell out of his pants pocket. It was a shard of something unknown, made of gold. A flood of memories flashed through his mind. Of marching through the desert with countless people. Of the feelings that seized him when he took a sword in his hands. Of how he managed to defeat an enemy and protect his life, of meeting Isabella von der Zee, and of how he exited the game and returned to the real world. All of it hit Park Hyunmyoung at once. Sitting in front of the computer in cheap sportswear bought at a market, the guy tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The surroundings made it clear that he was in his room. At first, he decided he couldn't have truly lived through all those memories, and that it had all been a dream. Then his attention was drawn to a leather pouch, and the shard of something unknown lying on the table in front of him. Hyunmyoung clearly remembered that he had never owned anything like that before. Moreover, these were items from the game. He automatically slipped the shard into his pocket, grabbed the mouse, opened the internet, and tried to visit the game's website. But the message that appeared on the screen said that such a page did not exist, and the game's main page, which had been working just a minute ago, had vanished. Just in case, he searched for similar articles, but there was not a single news report about the service shutting down. A sudden scream from the street that there was a monster outside pulled Hyunmyoung's attention away from the computer. The city was burning, and people were fleeing down the streets from the monsters. Many people, dead and wounded, lay on the ground. The police tried to resist the giant mantises, but firearms couldn't pierce their armor. At that moment, an emergency alert came to his cell phone telling citizens to evacuate to the nearest shelters. Leaning out the open window, Hyunmyoung tried to understand what exactly had happened to his city while he was in the game, and why the monsters from Pangea were roaming the streets like they owned the place. Recoiling from the window, the guy fell onto the futon, and from the fall, the shard slipped out of his pocket. Park Hyunmyoung remembered one of the messages he had received earlier, the one that talked about the collapse of Pangea and the possibility of the boundary between reality and the game being erased. The horror of realization pierced him, and a single thought hammered in his head. What to do? Because in real life, he had nothing to fight with. Suddenly, he felt the shard with his fingertips, brushing it with his hand. A wild thought formed in his mind. If items from the game had really appeared in reality like this, then couldn't those items be used in reality as well? He immediately rushed to the computer desk, where the leather pouch was still lying. The moment he loosened the pouch's mouth, light poured out of it. Right after that, the High Dragon Soul Stone and the Sword of Mikola materialized. Grabbing the stone, Hyunmyoung began shaking it furiously, trying to figure out how to activate it, because in the game, you only had to press a button. The next moment, the guy remembered that he also had the fragment of the shattered law. According to the system, it allowed synchronization between reality and Pangea for 24 hours, and it could also be used in the Golden Rule shop. He clenched the shard, symbolizing the Golden Rule, and before him appeared the goddess of Pangea, whom he always saw when logging into the system. After that, a system message appeared stating that synchronization with the character Randolph had been completed. Outside, it was hell, with giant mantises hunting people. Civilians ran, but many didn't make it. A little girl in her mother's arms, as her mother ran with all her might, asked where her dad was and why he wasn't with them. The woman wanted to answer the dad would come to them soon, but suddenly the neighboring building began to collapse and debris rained down on them. The next moment, the girl found herself dazed, sitting on the ground. Her mother was nearby, pinned under a concrete chunk of wall, and the girl rushed to her, but the woman told the child to keep running. Nearby came the dull footsteps of a running person. A young woman in an office suit, barefoot, hurried toward them. The woman under the slab begged her to save her daughter and take her far away, understanding that alone she could do nothing more to help. The woman in the suit fell silent. Then she scooped up the girl, promising to take care of her. But suddenly, she sensed something behind her. A monster had appeared at her back, ready to swallow its prey at any moment. Clutching the child to her, her life flashed before her eyes, and the girl thought, strangely detached, that this was how she would die. But the next instant, a beam of light sliced through the air. A person appeared right in front of her, splitting the monster in two. The man's eyes glowed with a mystical light as he turned toward the next beast. The giant mantis shrieked and howled in pain as the man swung a huge sword as if it were a toy, slicing monsters apart. The girl could only stand there, stunned, and watch it all. Seeing chunks of the beasts raining down around her and the little girl, she realized she had never in her life witnessed such brutal, such desperate violence. An untamed, wild masculinity she had never felt before boiled off the man in front of her, and the girl wanted to know who he was. There came the clatter of claws and heavy feet. From behind the man, another giant mantis was approaching again. The girl screamed, warning the man of danger, but the next moment, another monster, far larger, pounced on the mantis. That stunned the young woman again, and she murmured in disbelief, asking what that had just been. The beast looked like a dragon made of 9 heads, something that couldn't even be compared to a giant mantis. The next moment, the man leapt and landed atop one of the new monster's heads. Looking at the girl, he told her not to be scared and not to worry about that monster. She flinched, her whole body trembling, not from fear, but from the sense of something inexplicable, something no words could describe. A thought spun in her head that this was a dream and she would wake up soon. Suddenly, the little girl tore free from her arms and ran to her mother. Right after that, as if realizing something, the woman turned her head and saw people already working together to pull the child's mother out from under the rubble. Then she looked back toward the mysterious man again. Sitting on the back of the 9-headed dragon, he kept fighting the monsters in the street, chopping them into fine pieces with his sword. Soon it became known that the monsters had appeared all over the world, not only in Korea. They were bringing chaos, destroying everything, and attacking people. However, it wasn't only beasts, because here and there, warriors were appearing, carving up creatures that were immune to bullets as if they were cabbage. They wore ghostly armor resembling medieval gear, used swords, spears, and bows, and mercilessly exterminated the monsters, claiming they could protect everyone from them. Like great heroes, they called on people to unite and destroy the beasts. All their battles were being streamed online, and one such video was being watched by a certain man sitting at home. He snorted with contempt, muttering that they were all idiots wasting fragments of the shattered golden rule, especially now, when reality and Pangea had begun to merge. The man was also a player, using the handle Massacre. He believed that in the future, the two worlds would become one, and in the coming chaos, all players would be rivals, because whoever collected more fragments would wield greater power. Recently, the game's Hall of Fame page had updated, the rankings had changed, and the one in first place had an insane 220 points. The player's name was Randolph, and nobody knew him, so Massacre considered him a phantom. Phantom, or ghost. That was what they called the player whose real name no one knew. Still, he had managed to gather a squad of NPCs, leading an expedition with his character into the demon realm, and he had almost reached the end of the game. But even for him, the expedition ended in total failure, and his character died. And when Phantom's strongest character died, the player himself was summoned into Pangea, so surely he had been summoned too. All players who had been personally dragged into the game knew that when summoned, your appearance changed and your equipment was reset, but your previous character's talents remained. Massacre was certain that the one who took first place in the rankings was Phantom. Otherwise, he couldn't have gained that many points while clearing the main story.
Park Hyun-myung opened his eyes, waking up.
He came to again in Pangea, sitting in the bath, realizing that monsters and summoned players had appeared in the real world, and that the latter appeared in the forms of their game characters. After thinking it over a bit, the guy reached some conclusions. His expedition into the demon world, which he had almost cleared with his last character, had failed. That happened because near the finale, the hired NPCs didn't so much help as get in the way, and companions who seemed reliable suddenly betrayed him, and they interfered in ways the game's mechanics shouldn't have allowed. Rising from the water, the guy thought that most likely all those interferences had actually been summoned players like himself. The ones who didn't want Park Hyun-young to reach the finale or saw him as a rival, and so could have been targeting him even back then, and could very well continue now. Heading to meet the Snake Princess, the guy reflected that if the real world and the game world merged, there would be nowhere to hide just by logging out. Understanding that to be safe in both worlds, he needed to become stronger and very fast, Hyun-myung came to Isabella with a specific goal. Looking down at him from her throne, the girl asked whether he had finished his rite, and hearing that it had gone well and the man had come to keep his promise, the girl was satisfied. Then she dismissed a maid with a wave of her hand when the guy added that he had a condition. Waiting until they were alone, the guy voiced his request. Hearing that he was asking her to take him to the sanctuary, the girl was stunned, saying he had clearly gone insane. But Park Hyun-myung insisted because his first main quest was survive, and the second was to obtain a class. And the one he wanted at any cost was in the place where the star rested. The moon poured its bright light over the ruins of the old palace. The sound of footsteps echoed with a wet, slapping hum through the empty corridors. Isabella moved quickly through the secret passage, dealing with the soldiers they encountered along the way without a shred of mercy. The girl had the talent necessary for killing, and she was so swift that most soldiers closed their eyes without even realizing they were dying. Park Hyun-young's neck went cold as he watched her actions while following Isabella, and the guy thought how good it was that they were on the same side right now. When a while earlier he asked her to take him to the sanctuary, the girl categorically refused. You'd have to be crazy not only to go there without permission yourself, but also to bring an outsider. But since the guy had received a quest from the game to obtain a class, he had no intention of backing down. To convince Isabella, he told her about the star hidden in the sanctuary, which he had discovered completely by accident while leveling one of his past characters. A strong argument was that the Desert Queen's curse could only be removed with the star's blessing. Of course, the girl objected, saying that if they were caught, even she wouldn't escape punishment. But the guy confidently said she could handle it. He realized that if he couldn't convince her now, his head would roll across the floor. So he declared that this was her last chance to leave the desert. Reaching the end of the corridor, Hyun-myung confidently said they had arrived at the right place. Standing before the staircase leading underground, the guy knew this was the entrance to the Holy Land. The moment they started descending, the system messages confirmed it, but a warning also came that the place was saturated with poison and demonic energy, and if the player didn't have the appropriate level and status, it was better not to visit this place. Hyun-myung had the hidden trait mutation, and if not for it, even if he got here, he wouldn't be able to reach his goal, because a level 2 beginner wouldn't stand a chance. He could have let Isabella go ahead here as well to easily clear the side quest to explore the sanctuary and collect the reward, but the guy chose not to. For him, it was far more important to hurry and complete the main quest. According to the system mission, the quest would only be counted when he obtained his class in the sanctuary, and the reward depended on which class he managed to obtain. Reading these messages, Hyun-myung was quite satisfied, because he was going to obtain that class. Their path led to a high cliff by an abyss, from which a strong updraft blew upward. Isabella looked out over the wide, bottomless expanse stretching before them. Here and there were pillars that were meant to be used to cross to the other side by jumping from one to the next. With a smug expression, the girl smirked. Then she confidently turned around, saying they had clearly gone the wrong way, but the guy stopped her, gripping her shoulder. When he asked where she was going, she replied that the bridge was an obvious trap, and if you went straight, the rising wind current would simply blow you away. She kept talking, but the guy cut her off, asking with a sly smile whether she was scared. The question reaction sounded so ridiculous that for a moment, Isabella was at a loss for words.
But as soon as the girl started saying that the snake princess had no concept of fear, the guy interrupted again, stating that she turned out to be far more cowardly than he had expected.
Isabella also remarked that the guy himself, at his level, was unlikely to manage this either. And besides, her leg had cramped up, but he simply crouched in front of her, offering his back. Seeing that, she got flustered and indignant, because no one had ever offered her such a way of getting across. But Hyunmyoung reasonably noted that she herself had said her leg had cramped.
And since they didn't have much time, they should hurry, because if the guards' corpses were discovered, all suspicion would fall on her, and the queen would assemble a pursuit squad, so it was better that he carry her himself. Realizing the guy was right, the girl fell silent, making her decision. Then she climbed onto his back anyway, muttering that if not for her leg, she would never do this. Telling her to hold on tighter, Hyunmyoung took a running start before jumping, but the direction he ran wasn't toward the bridge, but in a completely different direction. Seeing that, Isabella panicked, starting to shout that he was running the wrong way, but the guy, not listening to her at all, jumped straight into the abyss. At that moment, his hidden trait, Mutant, activated. It allowed Hyunmyoung to see everything hidden that was inaccessible to an ordinary human eye. At first, Isabella thought the guy had gone insane and decided to take his own life, but then she realized he was calmly stepping on some invisible stones, explaining that this was the true path. The girl was stunned that he knew a route she herself didn't know, and it also seemed strange to her that he wasn't even out of breath here, where the air was saturated with poison and demonic energy. Sensing her tension, the guy smirked and teased her, saying it was a surprise to him to discover that the Desert Army's commander was afraid of heights. Isabella was irritated by the very thought that Hyunmyoung was acting so relaxed around her, but his confidence clearly wasn't coming from strength since he was only level 2, and yet he treated her as if they were old friends who hadn't seen each other in a long time. Thinking about it, the girl asked if they had met before, to which Hyunmyoung first replied that they had never before intersected in the same space. When the girl asked what he meant, he answered that he had seen her before, but she had never seen him. After that, his palm touched some point in space, and ripples spread through the air. The next instant, the world flipped, and everything was flooded with bright light. An invisible barrier burst, and a new space opened before them. They found themselves in the middle of a field of flowers, with hills bathed in bright sunlight visible all around, completing a peaceful, relaxing landscape. But Park Hyunmyoung was not relaxed at all, because the barrier had hidden more than just this tranquil territory. It had also hidden powerful enemies. The next moment, red lights flared on the hills lining the perimeter of the meadow. The ground trembled, and the space was stained with an alarming red glow. Right after that, the hills took the shape of human bodies and rose to their feet. Each monster resembled a 10-meter giant, with a single eye and a magical rune on its chest. Hyunmyoung recognized them as high-level guardian golems, which he was not in any condition to handle right now. Turning to the girl, he snidely asked whether her cramp had passed, and she only snapped back, demanding he stand quietly off to the side and not get in her way. The next moment, the monsters charged at them. One of the golems swung its hand, clenched into a fist. Then it tried to strike Isabella, but the girl didn't even flinch. Then an evil smile, like a snarl, appeared on her face, and the golem's hand was covered in glowing cracks from cuts. The monster's arm exploded into fragments, while the girl remained in place, proudly raising her sword. The fact that it didn't crumble entirely left the girl dissatisfied. That only motivated her more, and she rushed into the attack herself. As the enemies closed in, Isabella dealt with them on her own, without any instructions. Even golems of that level, which the guy couldn't handle right now, turned into soft tofu in her hands. Watching her deal with the golems, Hyunmyoung gave a crooked smile, realizing it was he who had once leveled her to such absurdity by giving her the assassin class. Her blades delivered swift, rapid strikes. One after another, the monsters shattered into fragments. In an instant, Isabella destroyed their cores and sheathed her daggers again. When the girl finished everything, a system message appeared before Hyunmyoung. It said the guy could obtain the Golem Creator class, which surprised him a little, since he hadn't killed a single one of them himself. In Pangea, there was a party system where everything was divided by contributions, and for some reason, it not only counted them as a team, but also credited him with all of the girl's achievements. The Golem Creator class was high tier, but it wasn't what Hyunmyoung wanted to obtain. For that reason, he refused the system's offer without hesitation. The moment Isabella defeated all the Guardians, the air filled with a heavy aura. Something insanely powerful was approaching. A system message immediately informed the guy that the Mountain Lord, where the nameless star rested, was enraged at the uninvited guests, and Park Hyunmyoung realized the location's main boss had finally appeared. the titan who protected the stars, Old King Dramit. To kill that colossus, you had to be at least level 10, and the pressure he emanated matched that. Isabella called to Park Hyun-young, skeptically asking whether he expected her to handle this monster too, and just as the guy assured her that the Guardian was quite peaceful and wouldn't attack first, the serpent struck the girl with its tail. She barely managed to leap aside, narrowly avoiding the blow. Level 10 was the level right before Transcendence, and Isabella, being only level 8, could not bridge that gap in rank. The beast's actions greatly surprised Hyun-young, because he truly hadn't expected that. Hissing angrily, Isabella mentally covered the guy in every curse she knew, but didn't dare say them out loud, afraid of enraging the serpent even more. Looking at the Guardian, Hyun-young muttered thoughtfully that he clearly remembered Dramut being a very kind creature who pointed the way to the star. At that moment, the serpent said that whoever wished to challenge the sanctuary must defeat it, and the girl immediately shouted that it wasn't her, and that she was just passing by. Naturally, the serpent didn't believe her, because earlier the girl had been smashing the Guardian golems with great enthusiasm. So it attacked her again, whipping its tail once more and declaring that whoever failed to prove they were worthy would not leave alive. The girl dodged again, but realizing the difference in strength and that she couldn't keep running forever, she demanded that the guy do something, anything. Watching the two play snake and mouse, Hyun-young wondered why Dramut hadn't behaved like this on his previous visit. Then something clicked. Old King Dramut, the mountain guardian who guarded the star, was a spirit materialized by the star's energy. The last time Hyun-young was here, his character had been Wilhelm, a 5-star level 10 character. When he came to this location, Dramut obediently guided him to the star, apparently considering Wilhelm worthy. But now his character was weak, and the Guardian chose to attack, forcing the guy to urgently come up with a way to deal with the situation. Suddenly, he remembered something. Isabella was already fighting at the very limit of her abilities. She knew she would die if she stopped moving, but she could no longer move the way she had at the beginning. Her body no longer obeyed her from exhaustion and from the sanctuary miasma. Watching the serpent's tail close in on her, the girl thought that maybe she had been wrong to trust the Star Reader and come here with him. And just as she braced to die from the blow, squeezing her eyes shut, a loud shout ordered Dramut to stop, calling it by name. More from surprise than truly obeying the command, the serpent's tail froze, never touching the girl's body. Dramut's gaze turned toward the owner of the voice. Staring at the weak human, the serpent growled, asking how he knew its true name. With a smirk, Hyun-young proudly declared that his master had returned, calling himself Wilhelm. Isabella also heard the guy's words and froze in surprise, because that name was familiar to her as well. Dramut looked at the guy distrustfully and asked again whether he truly was Wilhelm. Then it opened its maw wide, burst into loud laughter, and began mocking the guy. Its voice was so loud that Hyun-young had to plug his ears. After laughing to its heart's content, Dramut addressed the guy again, saying that Wilhelm had been a great man, so perfect that it had been an honor to serve him faithfully. But all the stars he had absorbed had returned to their places, which meant Wilhelm had not survived the expedition into the demon world. And even so, a weakling like the guy standing before it had no right to speak his name, much less claim he was him. All that time, Park Hyun-young didn't even flinch under the pressure of its power and aura, and the moment the serpent fell silent, the guy coldly demanded that it honor the contract made with him. That both surprised and angered the Guardian, and it asked how the human also knew about the contract. After all, no one should know the contract existed except the two of them. Wilhelm had made a contract with Dramut. Whoever arrived at the sanctuary and spoke the Guardian's true name could become the next master of the star and the mountain guardian. In that case, the latter had to obey the new master, and the contract's contents could not be revealed to anyone because the violator would die. Of course, there was a chance that after the character's death, the contract became invalid, but apparently the game settings didn't allow that. Dramut was the one guarding the star, instinctively sensing the other's level, and it knew for certain that this human not only failed to meet the standard, he wasn't even properly prepared. But Hyun-young unwaveringly demanded to be taken to the star, assuring it that then it would understand who he really was. Hearing the guy's demands, the serpent only smirked, assuring him that someone like him would burn up the moment he got close to the star. Hyun-young only smirked at that remark and said provocatively that the Guardian was simply afraid he truly was its master. In Dramut's eyes, he was a weak, ridiculous little brat who would be enough for a single bite, and it sincerely didn't understand what his self-confidence was based on. But according to the contract, it had no choice anyway, so the serpent agreed to take them to the star. Because even if it didn't believe the guy was Wilhelm, the rules remained unbreakable, and it only hoped the star itself would decide whether the guy was a worthy bearer. Dramit didn't allow the humans to ride on its back, and they reached the mountains only when it had grown dark. And when they got inside, Isabella was greatly surprised. The place where the star was kept looked quite ruined and desolate, and if not for the altar, it wouldn't have looked like a sanctuary at all. When asked whether the star was truly here, the guy confirmed that it was. And when they approached the altar, the girl watched in mute astonishment as a human skull lay upon it. Seeing the girl's complete confusion, Hyunyoung smirked and explained that stars were what they called body parts of the deceased twin goddess Rhea. When the goddess died, her body was split into 32 parts and scattered across the world. Players needed them to reach supremacy, and Hyunyoung was no exception, feeling satisfied as he took the skull into his hands. The next moment, the space around him changed, and a fiery vortex spiraled up around the man's body. Seeing this, Isabella grew anxious and cried out, asking if he was okay. Dramit, in turn, only laughed, gloating and saying that this was what it meant when it spoke of the guy's worthlessness, and now the star would burn him to ashes. But to its surprise, the man's silhouette in the flames did not writhe in pain and did not change shape. Hearing the serpent's words, Hyunyoung got a little angry because it hadn't warned him of anything like that. There were cases when stars killed players, but that was only when they came to them bypassing the Guardians, and since Dramit had brought them, there shouldn't be danger, but it still made him nervous. What worried him even more was whether the star could give him that class, because he had found the information on a forum, and it might have been unreliable. Suddenly, a voice sounded in his head. The goddess's voice began listing the hidden traits the guy possessed, and when the last trait was named, the star granted him a title, the one who survived destruction, after which it crumbled into fine dust and was absorbed into the guy's body. From that, his body began to undergo changes, and system windows crashed over him like a waterfall. At the end came the main message. He had been assigned the class Kissed by the Stars. A message also appeared saying that some constellations of the Pantheon had noticed his steps. Watching everything unfold, Isabella's eyes widened in shock as she realized the guy had managed to absorb the star. His aura noticeably changed after that, and he himself seemed far sturdier. After finishing with all the messages, Park Hyunmyoung asked the girl what she planned to do once the curse was lifted from her. Still not fully recovered from her astonishment, Isabella honestly answered that she wanted to leave the desert to find her family. Then the guy said he would bless her so she could leave, but on one condition. He asked the girl to serve him for 1 year. In exchange, he promised not only to fully release her, but also to help in the search for her family. Isabella froze when she heard that, because earlier the queen had already promised to lift her curse, but never kept her word. She was afraid of making the same mistake and becoming bound to the guy instead. Park Hyunmyoung knew this, so he understood the girl's doubts perfectly. Placing a hand on her shoulder and looking straight into her eyes, the guy honestly said he had no intention of lying to her, because he was not the Desert Queen. Hearing her doubts spoken out loud by him, the girl flinched. After thinking a little longer, she came to a decision. Kneeling before him, Isabella von Dergen swore loyalty to Park Hyunmyoung for the agreed period. Confirming her words, the guy was completely satisfied with her decision. Then he turned to Dramit and asked whether it now acknowledged that he was the master of the star, and therefore its master as well. Reluctantly, the Guardian confirmed it, because the guy wasn't even at Wilhelm's level, worse than a Guardian golem. After that, Hyunyoung demanded that the Guardian bow its head before him. The Desert Queen was furious. The squad of elite guards who appeared before her brought news that Isabella and the slaves she had captured had together invaded the sanctuary. Her next order was to capture them immediately. The sun bathed the city's calm streets in light. On one of them stood a cozy cafe called Angel Us Coffee. Two burly men who looked very much alike, and a girl, sat at a table discussing whether Randolph, who had swiftly broken into the top of the rankings, might be that phantom. One of the men was sure it was, because it was impossible to gain that many points without deep knowledge of the game, while the second suggested contacting him as soon as possible. The girl asked slightly absently how exactly they were supposed to do that, since they hadn't been able to find him for years. The first man objected that it was only because Phantom wasn't a real player, but now there would definitely be a way to contact him, for example through phishing, because he would definitely appear at the secret auction. The girl agreed that Phantom would need good items if he wanted to keep holding his position in the rankings, and she repeated the term thoughtfully. At the secret auction, players could trade items, and there were those who listed good items at low prices. Phishing was what they called an act where paired amulets were attached to such items to track the buyer's location. Newbies who didn't know about it carelessly bought cheap items at the auction, and they were often tracked down, then robbed, or even killed. One of the twins asked skeptically how a professional like Phantom could fall for such a trap, trap, since he should know every type of amulet in the game and would definitely notice. To that, the girl objected that it was the opposite. This could work because he was an unusual person with the nerve to start an expedition into the demon world. The girl's face showed how obsessed she was with Phantom as she went on, saying the man would definitely buy what he needed even if he saw the amulet, accepting the challenge of anyone who tried to attack him. The girl's eyes glittered, and her imagination ran wild as she tried to picture who Phantom really was. And looking at her, the men could only shake their heads. But not all the city's streets were drenched in bright sunlight. There were also dark alleys of filthy slums. A man in one such place noted with displeasure that the Hall of Fame rankings had updated. According to the list, Randolph had scored 230 points and taken first place, pushing Massacre out of the table and stripping him of the right to participate in the secret auction. Massacre closed the game window and muttered that he couldn't even imagine what class could have brought in so many points. Glancing at the bodies lying before him, the man noted that it wasn't such important news anyway, because his ranking would rise as soon as he killed someone from the top. Dramit raced swiftly along the roads of the sanctuary. Sitting on the Guardian's back, Park Hyun-young was able to finish the exploration quest at incredible speed, for which he received the Book of Teleportation, as well as the title Conqueror of the Sanctuary. The guy was very pleased with this. Even though the book could only be used once a day, it could take him to any place he had already been before. At that moment, he also received a notification that he had reached level 3. In this system, the required experience to level up increased as talents developed, and the amount of experience Hyun-young needed was at least 10 times the average. But he couldn't complain because his stats also grew faster than average. But most importantly, the items Hyun-young received as rewards for clearing the main quest were incredible, drawing nervous chuckles from him, which made Isabella look at him in confusion. One of those items was the Cloak of Shadows, which made its owner invisible when activated, effectively replacing a full-fledged skill. Dramit kept moving toward the exit of the Sanctuary, acting like a taxi for Park Hyun-young and Isabella. Suddenly, he sensed something strange ahead. A large number of people were approaching them very quickly, and every one of them had invisibility-type traits. Dramit decided to warn the guy that outsiders had appeared in the Sanctuary. Hearing his words, Isabella assumed it was most likely the Desert Queen's people, and Hyun-young realized he'd stayed here longer than he'd planned. The girl asked what he intended to do next, adding that the queen herself probably wouldn't be here, but the number of warriors was growing by the second, to the point that even with the Guardian, they would hardly be able to handle it. They needed to leave before the sanctuary was closed, and Hyun-young decided to use his reward. Once she learned the cloak's properties, the girl immediately understood what the guy was about to do. Covering himself and Isabella with the cloak, making them invisible to everyone around, Hyun-young ordered the Guardian to carry out his direct duty, namely, to unichtojit all intruders. After running a long distance away from the Guardian's rampage, Park Hyun-young, no longer hiding, led Isabella to a certain place. The guy explained that the people they had already encountered were most likely an advance unit, and if they hesitated, the main forces would arrive, and then they wouldn't be able to leave the sanctuary. So it was better to do everything quickly. He could even stop being stealthy since the queen wouldn't be here. Isabella asked in surprise why he hadn't taken the Guardian as a bodyguard, to which the guy replied that the Guardian could not leave the sanctuary's territory, and the best thing they could do right now was teleport to the edge of the desert, so he was leading them to the gates. He had already lifted the curse from Isabella and she could leave the desert with him, but there was one problem. The gate activation required time. Isabella was seeing gates for the first time in her life, because at Ansha there had been no reason for her to look for them. Hyun-young told her about the delay in activating the gates. When the girl asked how long it would take, he explained that it would be about half a day. There weren't many places to hide in the desert, and although Dramit would buy them a bit of time, they would most likely be found sooner. He also added that until the spatial gates activated, he would need to talk to the stars. He didn't know what was happening in reality right now, so he wanted to return for a short while, but he couldn't leave his character defenseless. Realizing what the guy meant, Isabella guessed what he wanted from her and gripped the hilts of her daggers tighter. Taking up guard, she promised to protect the guy no matter what. Taking a deep breath and closing his eyes, Park Hyun-young logged out of the game. He opened his eyes, already lying on the bed in his apartment. He still couldn't get used to moving from one body to another, which made him feel discomfort both physically and mentally. First of all, he decided to check world news on his phone, but there were no government warnings and the internet was silent too, meaning no new monsters had appeared during that time. Reality and Pangea were merging slowly, but much was still unclear and unknown. And Park Hyun-young had to return to reality from time to time, risking his character to stay informed about what was going on, and to eat, of course. Suddenly, the phone phone in his hands came to life. A message popped up on the screen asking if he was okay, and the sender was his ex-girlfriend Kim So-yeon. A few stops away from his home, there was a small cafe where Park Hyun-myung used to meet his, now bivshaya, girlfriend. Right now, a loud female voice with an indignant tone was echoing through the entire cafe as she spoke on the phone. All the cafe's visitors and staff learned in surprise that the person on the other end had deceived the girl by pretending to be rich, which made her very unhappy when the truth came out. Stating that she was still mad at him, Kim So-yeon demanded that he neither text nor call her today, since she was going to meet a friend, after which she hung up. Fuming, she cursed the caller with every obscene word she could think of. Luckily, he could no longer hear her and couldn't take offense. The image of Park Hyun-myung came to mind, someone she considered a total loser, but at least he never talked back to her. Remembering how they had broken up, the girl thought that maybe she had rushed it since the replacement turned out to be not a polnatsenne one. At that moment, Park Hyun-myung himself walked up to her table, and the girl, turning to face him, smiled brightly. The guy didn't return the smile, and asked why she needed him, to which the girl evasively suggested he should just sit down and chat about life for now. Hyun-myung sat down next to her, but he didn't projectile the light tone of the conversation, insisting on his question because he was in a hurry. Quietly clicking her tongue, So-yeon noted to herself that he was too proud for his situation, and then said out loud that the guy hadn't changed at all. He always came to meet her as soon as she called, just like today, and she really liked that about him. But she could fully estimate his character only after the breakup, so she kept thinking about him and deeply regretted her impulsive move. Hearing her question about whether he had missed her, Hyun-myung paused for a moment, only not to decide what to say, but to consider whether he should order something since he was in a cafe, or if he could skip it. Seeing that the guy wasn't answering and was simply staring at the promotional offer, So-yeon called to him a couple of times, but still got no response. Suddenly, the guy stood up from his seat as if he really had forgotten to turn off the iron at home, and said that if this was all the girl wanted from him, then he was leaving. That threw So-yeon off so much that she involuntarily shouted, demanding that he stop, and then asked if he was really offended by what she had said to him when they broke up. Not wanting to hear what else she was going to say next, Hyun-myung cut her off with a question. Did her current boyfriend know that she had gone to meet her ex? Before coming here, the girl had changed her avatar from a photo with her new boyfriend back to their old one, but she hadn't deleted the posts, so Hyun-myung knew everything about her personal life. The guy didn't know whether to call it audacity or whether So-yeon truly considered him that spineless, but he wasn't going to stay near her anymore. Before, around her, he was afraid to say a word out of line so as not to upset her, but now he was surprisingly calm. Perhaps influenced by Randolph's growth, the same way Pangea was affecting reality. When he left the cafe, his attention was caught by shouting and cursing on the other side of the street. Some man was waving a box cutter, holding a petite girl in a business suit by the hair and threatening passersby. When the girl demanded that he let her go, calling the man a sick pervert, he tried to stab her with the knife. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, thinking he was about to kill her. But nothing happened because someone intercepted the hand with the knife, preventing the man from injuring her. Cracking her eyes open, she looked at the person who had decided to vmeshatsa. Park Hyun-myung tightly gripped the man's arm and ordered him to stop. Feeling the strong khvatka on his wrist, the man bristled and demanded that he let go of him. Park Hyun-myung put strength into the hand gripping the wrist, and the offender screamed, complaining that the guy was about to break his arm. Even though the guy wasn't using a fragment of the broken golden rule, his strength was far greater than before, which meant his body was changing too. Easily tossing the man aside, Hyun-myung walked up to the girl and asked how she was feeling. Still a little shaken, the girl assured him she was fine now and thanked the guy for saving her life. Park Hyun-myung felt like he had seen her before and stared at her thoughtfully, which made her feel embarrassed. Then the guy remembered she was the one who had tried to save a child when the giant mantises appeared. When the girl asked why he was looking at her like that, he replied that she had simply reminded him of someone he knew. Suddenly, the girl cried out a warning that the criminal was attacking him from behind with a knife in his hand. But Hyun-myung already knew, so he easily turned around and blocked the strike. Then he decided to teach the man a lesson as well. Grabbing the thug, he slammed him hard into the ground, and the man hit his head on the pavement and immediately lost consciousness without even moving. The girl watching it all was stunned, because everything happened too fast. Lately, Park Hyun-myung had been on the brink of death in battle countless times, and so he remained completely calm. The police arrived only about 5 minutes later, when everything was already over, and the criminal was arrested. The officers also demanded that Park Hyun-myung come with them to to the station. When an officer tried to detain the guy, the rescued girl stepped forward, saying she had called the police and Hyun-myung had simply saved her, but the officer replied that the guy had still committed an act of violence. Hyun-myung wasn't afraid of visiting the police, but he truly didn't have much free time, since he needed to return to the game as soon as possible. The officer insisted they could not violate procedure, and the girl, seeing that the guy was in a hurry, decided to help by asking whether they were ready to take responsibility if a witness got dragged into something. At first, the officer didn't understand what she meant, but when she introduced herself as Kim Hana and said she was a reporter for the SK channel, the policeman fell silent. SK was part of a large broadcasting network with significant reach, and if one of its reporters claimed the police were harassing an innocent person, the department would have serious problems. Not all the bystanders had left. Some stayed to see how it would end, and they heard Kim Hana's words clearly, recognizing her and starting to discuss it among themselves. Deciding it was better not to blow up a scandal over something minor, the police agreed to take only Hana as the complainant, and left Hyun-myung alone. The girl thanked the guy again for saving her. Then she handed him her business card and explained that she was a correspondent covering the topic of dimensional warriors. The term was unfamiliar to Hyun-myung, and she explained that it referred to the people who appeared on the day of the monster invasion and defeated the beasts, which is why people started calling them dimensional warriors. The guy realized she meant the Pangea players, surprised that there wasn't a single word about the game itself, assuming an interdimensional invasion sounded far more believable than a game coming to life. In the end, Hana asked for Hyun-myung's phone number, but at that moment, So-yeon ran up to them, asking the guy if he was okay. Clinging to his arm and glaring angrily at the reporter, she asked whether Hyun-myung was hurt. The guy shrugged her hand off as Hana asked whether So-yeon was his girlfriend, and he answered that she wasn't. Then the reporter, right in front of a stunned Kim So-yeon, asked for his phone number again, and he didn't refuse. After entering his contact into her phone, Hana complimented his name, noting that it was beautiful. Then she asked him to text her tomorrow, and in gratitude, she could treat him to coffee or have dinner together, after which she said goodbye. Recovering slightly from the shock, So-yeon started getting angry since she wasn't used to Hyun-myung ignoring her or pushing her aside, choosing someone else instead. She had never seen that kind of behavior from the old Pak Hyun-myung, and it infuriated her. Leaving the police station, Kim Hana was completely exhausted and decided to head home. On the way to the metro, her phone rang. On the other end, a cheerful voice called her the higher being of the SK station and asked how her day off was going. The girl sighed tiredly and asked them to get to the point, and she was told that the deputy director had ordered a personal assignment for her, namely to interview Gracia. Hearing that name, Hana asked if the caller meant the very man considered America's hero, and then wondered why the assignment had been given to her. The caller confirmed that yes, it was the same Gracia who had saved America, and that he personally said he wanted to see Kim Hana specifically. Moreover, for this meeting and interview, he was ready to fly to Korea himself. The air reeked of blood, and countless dead bodies lay all around. Isabella was breathing hard, feeling exhausted. For many hours now, she had been fighting the guards sent by the Desert Queen to protect the Stargazer's body. The pursuit squad included great warriors, and Isabella was at the very limit of her strength. One of the pursuers demanded that the girl hand over the slave and return to the Queen with them, and then they would pretend nothing had happened. But Isabella understood it was all a lie. Looking at the pile of corpses, they simply didn't want to fight her even when she was tired. So she refused, of course. Then the men rushed her all at once, trying to overwhelm the girl with numbers. If Isabella had been in normal condition, killing them wouldn't have been difficult. But she had already been in this state for about half a day. By some miracle, she had managed to hold out until now, all while protecting another person. At that moment, the teleportation gates lit up. Warp space activated behind her, revealing a breathtaking spectacle. Isabella felt the waves coming off the gate against her skin, but she still didn't turn around to look. And at that moment, Pak Hyun-myung wrapped an arm around her shoulders, saying she had done well protecting him. When the girl asked whether he was done speaking with the stars, the guy smiled and assured her everything had gone well. Seeing that the girl was no longer alone, the warrior's leader ordered the traitor executed, realizing the pair would now definitely try to escape. Hyun-myung extended his hand and said that since the girl had kept her promise to protect him, he would keep his too, and a bright light began gathering in his palm as he activated a skill. Countless stellar rays flowed into his fist as he clenched his hand, and then, as if claws of starlight had formed, tongues of flame rose above his knuckles. The skill he was using, granted by his title, was called Star Claw, level 1, and it was supposed to last about 40 seconds. But that was more than enough.
Every warrior burned up in that light as if they were being devoured by real stars.
An explosion rang out, loud enough to deafen everyone around, and a pillar of fire shot upward, vaporizing everything within its reach. Staring at that pillar of starlight, Isabella was left speechless. Seeing her reaction, Hyunmyoung told the girl it still wasn't too late to change her mind and go back. He wouldn't stop her.
But Isabella refused without hesitation. A faint smile touched her lips.
She had always prayed and dreamed of crossing space and traveling to another continent. So she resolutely stepped into the teleportation gate after Hyunmyoung. From the desert, it was possible to teleport to 12 interconnected cities, and Park Hyunmyoung chose the Golden City of Arcana on the central continent. Arcana was a city where materialism had reached its absolute peak, and without enough gold to match a great magnet, players shouldn't even set foot there. And the moment the pair crossed the spatial gate, an endless sea of people opened up before them. Many wore expensive clothes and rode in golden carriages.
Isabella looked around in a half-dazed state and was stunned by the towering buildings and exotic architecture.
When the guy remarked that they should probably secure some funds first, the girl smirked proudly and said she had brought 300 gold coins. But Hyunmyoung did not share her joy, because he knew this city well, and for it, that amount was pathetic pocket change. At best, it would cover one night in a cheap inn, and even then, without food. That information shocked the girl, because in the desert, it was a significant sum, enough to buy 10 slaves. The prices here were drastically different from those in the desert, and the girl froze, not knowing what they should do next. But Park Hyunmyoung clearly wasn't worried, telling her that money was lying everywhere in this city, which only confused her even more. Then the guy pointed at the sign of an establishment right next to them.
Isabella didn't immediately understand what he meant because in her mind, a stargazer and gambling were incompatible things.
But Hyunmyoung was more confident than ever, considering himself quite lucky. And he had every reason for that, because one of his hidden traits was called Golden Blessing. The Golden City of Arcana is also called the City of Pleasures, where only one law ruled, and that was the law of money. And Hudson Casino was a place run by Hudson, the Lord of Arcana. The manager at the entrance let his gaze slide from the pair's feet to their heads, assessing their outfits. At Hudson Casino, there was a rule. Customers who could not deposit at least 10,000 gold were not allowed to enter the building. Hearing that, Isabella whispered indignantly to Park Hyunmyoung, asking why he hadn't warned her since they had already spent most of her money to get themselves presentable. Reasonably noting that they still wouldn't have had enough cash anyway, the guy reached into his chest. When the manager remarked that by standing there they were blocking other customers from entering, Hyunmyoung pulled something out and handed it to the man, saying they would use it as collateral. A gemstone lay on the guy's palm, and after activating appraisal, the manager determined it was a tear of the Fairy Queen, a precious magical gem. Realizing he had almost driven off someone carrying something that valuable, the manager began trembling all over. In the next moment, his attitude changed completely, and he personally escorted the pair to a VIP hall. Isabella became curious about what the stone of Hyunmyoung's was, and he explained its value to her as they followed the manager. He had received that treasure as the second reward for clearing the sanctuary, and the gem was worth more than 1 million gold. When the girl asked how he could hand over something that valuable, the guy replied it wasn't a problem, because he would take it back after winning here a couple of times. Roulette is the most popular gambling game in a casino. If the ball lands in one of the wheel slots, you win by betting on red, black, odd, even, or a specific number. Hyunmyoung decided to start with it, and for several games in a row, he kept winning one round after another, stunning everyone present with his luck. A mountain of chips was already piled up in front of him, and the onlookers' comments said the guy had already won more than 1 million. Park Hyunmyoung was confident in his victory because he possessed the Golden Blessing trait. Isabella was thrilled, which could not be said for the casino employee. He stated that the casino would, of course, pay out the guy's entire winnings, but from now on, entry to Hudson Casino was closed to him. Hyunmyoung wasn't particularly surprised, because everyone copying his bets was winning too, so the casino was losing far more money than he had won, and that was a big problem, and the guards surrounded the pair. Park Hyunmyoung was politely but firmly asked to leave the casino immediately. Isabella sharply looked around, releasing a murderous aura. But Hyunmyoung stopped the girl, assuring them they would leave, but first he would like to see the casino owner. The manager categorically stated that it was impossible, and the guy shouldn't cause a scandal here. But he only smirked and noted that it was actually the boss who would want to meet him, so the manager should report it. The casino owner Hudson was sitting in his office, examining the tear of the Fairy Queen. Activating the skill, Hand of Observation, he confirmed its authenticity. Hudson couldn't understand how such a valuable item had ended up with such a random person, the very kind of person he had been searching for so long. Only the Fairy Queen's knights possessed the tear, and they rarely left their lands. But even then, killing them required no fewer than 3 people of the 10th level. Swallowing, the man thought it was a miracle that such an item had come to his casino on its own. At that moment, there was a knock at the door, and the manager reported that the owner of the tier wished to meet him. He also added that the talisman's owner claimed Hudson himself would want to see him, which surprised the man. Realizing what was said, Hudson smirked and ordered that he be invited in for a cup of tea. Sometime later, Park Hyun-young was sitting on a sofa across from the casino owner. Isabella stood tensely behind his back, acting as his guard. Studying the guy, Hudson thought he didn't look like a strong fighter. Speaking first, the man noted that he had been told the guy's words and asked what he had meant by that. Hyun-myung took the cup of tea in front of him and replied that he simply knew Hudson would want to meet him, so that was exactly what his words meant. And then he directly stated that the casino owner needed this talisman, making Hudson's eyes widen. But his shock didn't last long, and pulling himself together, he noted that the guy was clearly aware he collected talismans, and so he was ready to buy the tier from him. Taking a sip of tea, Hyun-myung agreed, on the condition that the price suited him. Hudson offered 2 million gold, considering it a generous proposal. The sum seemed so huge to Isabella that she couldn't hold back an exclamation of surprise. But Hyun-myung remained indifferent, naming a sum 10 times higher than the offer. Hudson shook his head, noting that with 20 million, you could buy a mansion in the center of Arcana. And no matter how rare the talisman was, it wasn't worth that. But the guy confidently stated that for Hudson, it was a normal price, to which the man objected that even he wouldn't spend that kind of money on a trinket for a hobby. Hyun-myung nodded and said that was true. If it were just a trinket, then of course it would be. And looking the man in the eyes, he confidently stated that the Tear of the Fairy Queen was not just a talisman, but his pass into the city council. Hudson didn't know what to say to that, because it really was true. And the minimum level to enter the council was the 10th. However, Hudson's class was merchant, and he couldn't break through the 9th level barrier on his own, so he needed the tear because it removed the restrictions on equipment requirements. But Hyun-myung's words that he also knew the true reason Hudson was striving to become a council member made the man noticeably uneasy. Hyun-myung knew about Serengeti, Hudson's fiancé, with whom he had secretly arranged an engagement, and he needed to become someone significant to be acknowledged by his fiancé's family. The girl was the only daughter of Marquise Weiser from the kingdom of Balron. She was also known as the Snow White Knight, the commander of the 500 strongest warriors, and she had participated together with Hyun-myung's previous character in the Great Expedition. Serengeti sacrificed both her legs in a battle with the Demon King to save Wilhelm's life when he was ambushed. Watching it from the other side of the screen, Park Hyun-myung had considered her act nothing more than a dramatic story beat, because back then, Pangea had been just a game to him. But after his character's death, a lot happened to him. He was transferred into the game, forced to go through the trials again, but now without any right to make mistakes. And once Hyun-myung realized that the NPCs he knew could actually be players, he remembered Serengeti's words. The last time he saw her, she handed him a necklace with a photograph depicting Hudson and asked him to look after this man if she couldn't return. After receiving Serengeti's necklace, Hyun-myung was initially surprised that the girl had a fiancé, but since the item didn't provide any bonuses or quests, the guy tossed it into his inventory and forgot about it. According to the game knowledge he had about her, Serengeti originally had no fiancé. Now he understood that someone had influenced the character's preset parameters, and the reason was that Hudson was a player just like him, who had simply adapted to this world. And now this player was staring at him with a stunned expression, mumbling that he had never told anyone and therefore didn't understand how Hyun-myung could know. Looking at the man with indifference, the guy thought that Hudson had entered the game long before him, which meant he had more information about this world and other players. To further reinforce the image of a stargazer, he solemnly pointed a finger at the sky and declared that he had heard it from the stars. Hearing that, Hudson straightened up in his chair and asked distrustfully whether the guy was a stargazer. Realizing the man was almost hooked, Hyun-myung smirked and said Hudson had the right not to believe him, but he could give him what he needed, and he didn't need money. However, Hudson would have to fulfill one condition. Hudson knew that stargazers sometimes did things like that, so he wasn't too surprised, but the condition itself, telling the stars the truthful story of his life, left him a little confused. Hyun-myung confirmed it again and noted that the stars favored only honest people, so the man must not lie. Hudson hesitated over whether to agree. Although stargazers were extremely rare among NPCs, revealing personal information could draw hunters to him. Hunters were NPCs who specialized in killing players while calling them criminals, and countless characters had died at their hands because they were masters of disguise. Hyun-myung had already realized that the only protection from them was absolute caution, because exposing yourself in Pangea was essentially suicide, which is why most players hid their identity. Hudson was no exception. But the guy was sure the man would accept the offer, because Serengeti was not just an NPC to him, she was something more. For Hudson, this place was no longer a game, and he truly loved the girl. After hesitating a little, the man made his decision and agreed to tell the guy his entire life story. But since almost all of his life goals were tied to Serengeti, he decided to start with her. And the man's very first words, that Serengeti was a brave knight and had participated in the great expedition under the command of 8 heroes, did not match what Hyun-myung knew about the game at all. Wanting to make sure he had understood correctly, he asked why the man was talking about 8 heroes when the expedition had been led by Wilhelm. But Hudson replied that Wilhelm was simply the most famous, not the only one, and that people said disputes had begun among the heroes, which was what led the expedition to fail. When the guy asked whether the man knew who exactly those heroes were, Hudson confirmed that he did, because they were all legendary figures, one of whom bore the name Grazia. A blonde, broad-built man sat in an office chair and scrolled through the news on his phone. His attention was caught by an article about a man riding a monster and fighting giant mantises, written by a reporter named Kim Hana. At that moment, a female secretary approached him, addressed him as Grazia, and said she had arranged an interview with the Korean journalist Kim Hana. Then she asked whether he really needed to fly to Korea in person when they could have brought the girl here instead. The US government didn't want the hero to leave the country, but the man shook his head and said he had to see everything himself because he had a feeling. He was sure the man from the article was the very partner he had been searching for. He didn't need the reporter girl. He needed the man in the photo.